Hi, I'm Rob. You're listening to Two Bi Guys. But first, are you looking to promote your brand to a target audience? Then Zencastr's Creator Network is the perfect place for you to get into podcast ads and sponsor your favorite creators like me. Podcast advertising is way more effective than display advertising, with 67% of listeners remembering brands and 63% making a purchase after hearing them. So whether you want to diversify your ad spend, add a new marketing stream, or test out podcast ads, Zencastr's Creator Network makes it easy for brands to connect with podcasters. Zencastr matches you with the best podcasts, like this one, so your product gets to the right audience and can maximize your advertising campaign budget. So start podcast performance marketing with Zencastr's Podcast Marketplace. They've made it easy to track conversions by integrating with major payment platforms such as Shopify and Stripe, and they've already proven that with the right fit, smaller podcasts can outperform bigger ones in a variety of verticals, allowing them to work with all podcasters. And I can attest to that. I've been part of the Zencastr Creator Network for a few months this whole season, and they've been great connecting me with brands, helping me with the ads, making sure that the brands will match our audience so that people are actually interested in what we're talking about, and so that I can keep creating. Interested in sponsoring this show or podcast ads for your business? Go to zen.ai/2biguys0. That's zen.ai/TWOBIGUIS, 0, and fill out the contact information so Zencastr can help you bring your business story to life. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Two Bi Guys. I'm here today with a special guest, a friend of mine who is running for office. I'm here with Lydia Green. Lydia is a 25-year-old bi Jewish woman, organizer, Democratic Party reform activist, and lifelong fourth-generation Brooklynite. She is running for district leader of the New York City Assembly District 52, which we'll ask her about. And we are old friends from Bi Request. We met at the Bi discussion group in New York City. So it's nice to see you again after a couple years of being away from Bi Request. But welcome to Two Bi Guys, Lydia.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. It's weird being on this because I'm also a longtime listener.
Cool. We love it. We love to just bring everyone into the fold. Eventually we'll get to everyone. run for office, and that's how you get on the podcast quickly. So we'll talk about the office stuff and the politics, which we love talking about on this podcast. But first, let's talk about you and your story and your bi identity. So I think I just went over this, but tell us in your words, what pronouns do you use and how do you identify on whatever spectrums you would like to identify on?
Yeah, I think you did go over a lot of it, but I use she, her pronouns. I'm a woman. I'm bisexual. I'm Jewish. And I've also lately been sort of toying with using the term disabled to describe myself. And actually, the episode that you had of your podcast last week was like one of the things that made me think of that, because your guest mentioned about how disability is something that people feel like you have to be a certain amount disabled in order to qualify, similarly to being bisexual. And I also like saw something on Twitter that was similar, and those things together have made me feel like, oh well, yeah, I do have mental illnesses, and like I have experiences that like could qualify as disabled. So I don't know. That was long,
Cool.
but
No, interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, it was really interesting what Ruby talked about last week about how, I mean, it's two different things, but how similar sort of that experience can be in terms of like recognizing it, coming out, like integrating it with your identity, shedding shame and stuff. Okay, so we'll get into that. I'm curious, like, I don't even remember when we met in By Request, but you're pretty young. So like when did you sort of start to realize you were bi, and what was that development like? And then we'll talk about how it intersects with those other things.
yeah. So I am pretty young, but I feel like I was relatively, well, not old, but on the older side from when I realized that I was bi. I was in college already, and I grew up in Brooklyn, but I didn't even really hear that bisexual was an option as the case for many bi people until I was in my teens, and then it took me a few years to realize that that was something that could apply to me. So it was right around like 2017 when I first started questioning, and what really sparked that questioning was that I actually found out about the word omnisexual,
Hmm.
which I don't necessarily identify as omnisexual, but previously I had just heard of bisexual and pansexual, and I thought that it was like if you were attracted to multiple genders, there was like one specific way that you could do that, and that was being gender blind and feeling like gender doesn't matter. And the way that I had felt attraction was always very different depending on the person's gender.
Hmm.
And so I was always assuming that my attraction to men was real and my attraction to women and non-binary people was not attraction and was something else.
Interesting.
And so hearing about the term omnisexual just kind of blew my mind and made me realize, oh wow, like it could be possible that all of these are attraction, and that I could be attracted to multiple genders, and that I am allowed to identify as bi.
How do you define omnisexual? It's been a
So
while
it's
since I've used that word.
Yeah, so it's often used in contrast to pansexual, and so it's attraction to all genders. But while pansexual is regardless of gender, omnisexual is like I want to say almost like because of gender. Like you're not gender blind. You see differences between genders, and maybe you feel different ways about different genders, but you like them all.
Yeah. Interesting. I do hear, people have different experiences with that. And like, it seems like, especially among, I'll say your generation, we're like half in the same generation, but
Yeah.
you're a little more connected to the young people.
That's another thing that I have on a spectrum is like my generation. Cause I'm like right in between generations.
You called yourself on Twitter a zillennial. Is that what it says?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
Zoomer slash or Gen Z slash millennial in between.
Yeah, exactly. Because so I was born in 1996, which is some people define that as being millennial, and some people define it as being Gen Z. And I have similarities to both generations. I have friends in different generations, so I'm like right in the middle.
Well, you better pick one side, otherwise people will be confused about you forever. No, I like that. Okay, but so I was gonna ask, like, I think we don't have to get too deep into this, but since it came up, this whole the labels thing and bi, pan, omni, like it seems to be a bigger debate like among young people who like to use the word pan, but like there are a lot of people like you who are not attractive regardless of gender, but can experience attraction. The potential is there, but it might feel different. So I guess my question is like, what do you see in among young people in terms of that stuff, and like how do you experience that omnisexuality?
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of young people do tend to use pan or queer or something else, but there are still a lot of people who use bi. So like I personally felt like I didn't necessarily identify with pan, as I mentioned, because I didn't feel gender blind about my attraction, and I also I think when I first started questioning my sexuality, I was like, well, I don't know if I'm actually attracted to all genders. um, I know that I'm attracted to more than one gender, but I don't know if it's all genders, and so I'm not ready to make that decision. And also, I just really like the bi flag and the history associated with bisexuality,
Hmm.
um, and like I think Brenda Howard is really cool, and all of the organizers who've been like working towards bi rights for the last like 40, 50 years.
Cool. Well, we'll get into it more later because there's always this issue of like uniting together in solidarity, and when are the things that make us unique important to talk about, and when are the things that bring us together important to talk about. And we will talk about that in terms of the Democratic Party in a few minutes. But getting back to, okay, so you kind of realized it in college, which is late. Everyone thinks they came out late. It's funny, no matter what, how young they are. I think I came out late. I was 30, but like, someone else came at by request came out in 50s and 60s. Anyway, what happened next? When did you actually start coming out? How did you kind of integrate that identity into your life?
Yeah, so I started talking to my sister about it. She was the first person who I sort of told that I was questioning, and then it also sort of sparked her questioning her identity also, which was really cool.
Cool.
And so then we took this sort of queer questioning journey together for a while. And so this was over the summer, and then I went back to college in the fall, and I decided to go check out the like LGBT club on campus, which at my school is called Allies. And I was thinking I would go there and just sort of like be a straight cis person, but then on the first day they had us go around in the circle and they were like, "What type of queer are you?" So I was like, "Oh well, I guess I have to spill the beans." um, and so like I mentioned that I was sort of like questioning and maybe a little bit attracted to women, and they were really kind. They were basically like, well, any amount of queer, you're welcome. There is no gatekeeping here. And so I really appreciated that, and that made me feel more welcome to explore my sexuality. And I sort of kept coming back to this club for a while, and also like talking to my sister. And I at some point I felt like, okay, I've like thought about this enough. I think I even like, there was a point where I was like, okay, I'm bi and I like identifying that way, but I don't know if I qualify.
Hmm.
um, which I think is probably common for a lot of bi plus people.
Hmm.
And
Oh yeah.
and I had some experiences where I was like, I would kiss a woman and then I'd be like, oh well, like I don't know if I really liked that, but it wasn't like I don't like this person, or was it I don't like this gender?
Right. Yep.
um, I think that when I started coming out, I was like not quite ready, and like in terms of to my parents, to my friends,
Hmm.
I think I was sort of feeling like well, with my parents, it actually happened that because I had also been talking about this with my sister, we sort of planned that we were going to come out together. And I think she was a little bit more ready to come out. And I don't know, it was nice to sort of have someone else to come out with at the same time. But on the other hand, I think that I maybe should have waited a little while until I was a little bit more secure in my identity, which like I feel a little bit more secure now than I did then.
Uh-huh.
But at the time it was like I felt like I had to like come out and also defend both for myself and to other people that this was a real sexuality and that it actually applied to me.
Yeah.
And
I totally identify with that part. It's like I almost feel like a lot of the first handful of people I came out to, especially my parents, I was doing more explaining what bisexuality is and saying that I believe in it rather than saying this I'm that, like just proving that it was real. Yeah.
yeah. And like I mean, I don't fault my parents necessarily. I think they also didn't know about bisexuality until the around the same time that I learned about it.
Right.
And like if they had known about it, they would have taught me about it.
Yep.
But yeah, instead I had to teach them about it,
Yep.
which was a an interesting role reversal.
And did your sister come out as bi also?
She came out as bi also. I think she sort of like doesn't really like to label herself. She's more attracted to women and non-binary people, and like I think she likes to use gay as an umbrella term, which is another thing that I feel like I've been seeing younger people well, I guess it's also like back in the like Stonewall era they were used gay as an umbrella term. But I always felt like I didn't really like using the term gay for myself because I felt like it was erasing other like bisexuality. And like I'm thinking of for instance like Orange is the New Black, how she is in a relationship with a man and she's straight, and then she's in a relationship with a woman and she's gay, and no one says bisexual at any point.
Yep.
And if they had used that opportunity to use the word bisexual, they could have educated people and taught people about another identity that exists. And I feel like in a lot of ways like that's part of the reason why it took so long for me to even learn that this was an option, was just because people don't talk about bisexuality and don't use the word bisexual.
Yep.
Yeah, so my younger sister, she's 4 years younger than me, so she's very much Gen Z. But she likes to use gay as an umbrella term, whereas I feel more comfortable with queer. Yeah, but she did initially come out as bi, but I think she's sort of backed away from labels a little bit since then.
Cool. I see a lot of that too, of like people not really wanting labels either. But I think it speaks to sort of the inherent fluidity of a lot of this stuff. And it makes sense to me that people don't want like a fixed label. But that's why I try to tell them that the label bisexuality includes all of that fluidity. So, like, it can be a stable label even when things are fluid. But still, to each his, her, or their own, and whatever label identifies you best and you feel comfortable with. Great. Your experience with the group at your college, I feel like I had that experience with By Request of like I wasn't quite ready for it. I was going to sit at the back and not say much, but then like I got there and it's a circle and like I wanted to speak and I just jumped in. What like I guess what was it like the rest of college? Did
Yeah.
you come out there and then how did you get to By Request after that?
Yeah. Um, so there is more to the story. So
There's more. Okay, sorry. Keep continue.
yeah. So for a while in college, I was like questioning and actively sort of trying to explore my sexuality, and then there was a while in my very last semester of college where I was just sort of not focused on it, and I was like, okay, well maybe I'm not really queer, maybe this was just a phase. I don't know, but then I always sort of felt like straight didn't exactly encompass the entirety of my identity, and I always sort of felt a little bit uncomfortable with trying to identify myself that way. And so there was a while where I was sort of like, I'm bi maybe, but I don't know. And I just like didn't talk about it. And it was like I came out to my parents, I think it was 6 months after I finished college, maybe. And like it was in that period of time where I was sort of like, I don't know, maybe not. And I guess it was also just like because I wasn't in college and because I was spending most of my time with my family and like meeting new people because I was getting out of college and trying to make friends in the real world. I just like didn't have a queer community around me as much. And so I just like felt very disconnected from it.
Mm-hmm.
And then so I went to Pride in 2019, and that was how I first found out about Bi Request, was because someone was handing out flyers for it.
Cool.
And but it took me a few months to actually get up the courage to go, which I feel like a lot of people have also, and like I think you might have said that you like took a few tries before you could actually go in the building.
I
Like
walked right past it at least once. Yep.
yeah. I know that I was like sitting on my desk for like a few months before I could get myself to actually go. And like the fact that it was in an LGBT center, I was just like run into the
Yeah.
like hide and run and close the door.
Yep.
And then like once I was inside, I was feeling like I was an imposter still. Like I was like, I'm not a real queer. Like I'm a fake. So it was like both ways were not great. Both
Wow.
being outside of the queer center and inside. But then I think the first meeting that I went to was actually the same week as your first podcast episode.
Yeah, because it
Um,
was like September 2019. It was like
yeah,
Bi Visibility Day or something.
it just happened to coincide with Bi Visibility Week. That was my first time going to Bi Request,
Cool.
which was just a happy coincidence. And Alex was there. I don't think I had met you until like a month or so later, but
Mhm.
Alex was there and Alex made an announcement about the podcast. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I'll check it out.
Perfect timing. And now it's
Yeah.
full circle. Okay.
And then I feel like I like being part of Bi Request and just like having a lot of friends who identify as queer. And also I feel like taking care of my mental health and like therapy have been helpful in like figuring out my sexuality and feeling more confident in who I am. And like I think especially with Bi Request, like the first time I came in, I felt like there was a very specific box that I had to fit into in order to identify as queer, which I think that was a topic of one of the Bi Request meetings that we were talking about. I seem to remember we were talking about bi boxes.
Sounds like a Bi Request topic. Yeah.
Yeah, but I felt like there was some specific stereotypes that I had to fit into, and I felt like I didn't necessarily meet all of the requirements. But then being at Bi Request was like I think being in person at Bi Request was also just like way more extreme of this than we've had on Zoom.
Yeah.
That it's just been like in person, people from all walks of life, different ages, different races, different abilities, different genders, different religions, just like every kind of diversity you can possibly think of. And like it's amazing how that managed to be a thing.
Yeah.
But I walked in and I was just like, well, no one here is the same. And so I'm allowed to be here no matter who I am and no matter how I present or like what's going on inside of me or anything.
Yep.
And so like that really helped me start to feel more valid in my identity. And I guess it was also like having more sort of flirtations with women that that also sort of like solidified for myself, like, okay, yes, I know I've had very strong romantic feelings for guys before, but it was like women, I was like, I don't know, maybe I'm just sexually attracted to them, maybe I like, and then there was also that feeling of like, am I just like a bad bisexual stereotype of like, I want to date men and just sleep with women, and it's like not real.
Uh-huh. Has that like so you were talking about your attractions may be different based on gender, so like that makes sense. It's basically how I felt at the beginning in reverse. Has that like shifted for you over time, like since you were first there, the how you feel about different genders?
Yeah. I mean, I think it still is somewhat, I don't know. I don't know how to describe how it's different, but I still think that my attractions are different, and they just like they feel different physically in my body.
Oh,
um
interesting.
but I think it has also like I've opened up more to the possibility of being in a romantic relationship with a woman, or a non-binary femme person, and in a way that I was not before. And I think also just like being part of queer spaces, going to queer bars, being part of queer groups on social media, all of those things have helped me sort of explore and be able to like imagine myself in a relationship with a woman. There also, to some degree, I think I probably was romantically attracted to women and sort of didn't accept it in myself, or like didn't let myself like believe that it was true. Like I think maybe there was some internalized homophobia or biphobia, which I think also is common for a lot of queer people, is that you just like look back over your childhood and your like teenager years and you're like, oh, I was so queer, how did I not notice?
Right.
Like
Yep.
there was in high school, there was this girl who I was really close friend with. She was an exchange student from Spain, and I definitely, like looking back on it, I definitely had a crush on her. I was like obsessed with her, and I even I literally like followed her to Spain.
Wow.
I went to Spain the next summer so that I could visit with her. And then I remember saying something like, I wish you were a boy so I could date you.
Wow.
And I just like didn't realize that was how queer that was.
Yep. Yep. I know it's like I also got so close to realizing it at times in my childhood, but there was just like a big wall up there and I never actually saw it. And then looking back, you see how close you got to something that was explicitly queer. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, I guess one other thing is just that I feel like the it seems like some people sort of come at it from like Alex comes from a place of identifying as gay and then finding out that he was attracted to more than just men, and whereas you come from the other side of identifying as straight for a long time and then figuring out your attraction to same gender. I think I'm more on the like straight, started out as straight side, and like
Mhm.
I definitely throughout like middle school and high school and college, like I think this also sort of like intersects with like mental health struggles in a lot of ways as well, and feeling like I was trying to prove something with myself, and like I constantly feeling anxious and all of the like crushes, and like I didn't really have relationships in college, but if I had, I probably would have felt very anxious in those also. um
Uh-huh.
and just feeling like I had to prove something, and that like I had to prove that I was like really attracted to men, and I had to prove that like I was I was straight enough, and
Mhm.
and like that this was real, and the other thing feelings that I was having were not real. And so I think I sort of like went to an extreme, and like throughout high school and college I was like very boy crazy. But then I think
Uh-huh.
when I started coming out as queer, I felt like, oh no, well, like people know me as like really boy crazy. How could I be attracted to women if people think that I'm bad?
Uh-huh. Yeah, interesting. I definitely identify with that feeling of like, which of these feelings are real, and what if I'm like deluding myself, and what if the things I feel are not real or whatever, and it's like can be hard to figure out. But actually I mean, it's interesting to connect that to mental health, because of course it is, but I don't think I realized that at the time, that like that's kind of self-doubt is a mental health issue and is related to my anxiety, which I'm working on now with a therapist. And like my mental health and my by coming out as bisexual were very much connected. Like it was the same sort of moment when I shifted things in a big way on both fronts. Do you want to talk a little more about your mental health journey, like how you got into therapy or realized you should be, and how that intersects with your bi identity and like the disability you brought up and all that?
Yeah. So I've really struggled with anxiety since I was like 11 years old. Like both regular anxiety and social anxiety. And so like when I was a really young child, when I was younger than 10, I was very outgoing. I would like make friends wherever I went. I would like my mom would say every time she took me to the playground, I would make a new friend. And then all of a sudden when I was in middle school, I just became really quiet, and I was really afraid to just like speak and interact with people. And people started saying that I was shy, which I felt like it didn't exactly I felt like that wasn't exactly right, because it felt like I felt like I needed to interact with people, and I wanted to,
Hmm.
and that this anxiety was sort of preventing me. I guess that's
Interesting.
another binary of like extrovert introvert that I think that I don't fit on one or the other completely well.
Uh-huh.
But I think that yeah, like growing up, like I was very extroverted, and then all of a sudden people started like labeling me as an introvert, and I was sort of like, well, no, not really. But I think for a long time I was sort of just like, okay, well, this is just how I am. Like I'm shy now, and it's weird because I used to not be shy, and I used to really love talking to people and meeting new people, and now I just don't. And it was like really not until like college that I started addressing it really. Well, also in college I also experienced depression for like one of the first times. And like I was never like officially diagnosed with depression, but like the way that my therapist has and I have talked about it is that they're sort of like depressive episodes, and that I went through periods of like at least 6 months where I was just like had low energy, and everything was just like very like it was difficult for me to like get up in the morning and do my homework and go to class, and like I just felt like sad and just depressed.
Hmm.
So I had two of those episodes during college, and they were both actually around. Basically, I had like been trying to date someone, and then it didn't go well. Like both of the episodes were like around romantic rejection, and I think that it had a lot to do with feeling like wanting to be in a relationship with these people, and especially because they were men, feeling like this was a big part of my identity, and that like I was never going to like be a good straight woman or something.
Hmm.
And so it was like it wasn't just about like this one rejection, it was like a whole like identity shaking and life changing experience. So I had some therapists on campus, and my like the mental health system on my college campus was like not great, because they limited how many sessions of therapy you could get per, I think it was per semester. So I actually like had I was seeing a therapist for a while, and then we had a session and she was like, oh, this is our last session. And then I had like one of my really huge rejections. And I was like, I needed a therapist, and I lost my therapist right then. And and
Of
they
course.
gave me a referral to someone else, but it was like I just did not have the mental energy to figure out like the stuff with insurance, and like figuring out scheduling a time to meet, and so
Yep.
I just sort of like let that fall to the side and didn't really pursue it. And then but then eventually I came home for the summer, and actually now that I think about it, this was the same summer that I that I started questioning my sexuality. That
Of
I
course.
found my current therapist here in Brooklyn, and so like when I was back at college, I was seeing her through. Well, it was back then it was Skype. Yeah, and then when I was home, it was in person, and I think she was like very good because she's very focused on like mindfulness and sort of like listening to yourself and like listening to like what the different parts of you are like trying to say and like why they're showing up in certain ways
Hmm.
at certain times.
Hmm.
And like I found that very helpful. And yeah, I mean, she's still my therapist now. And I think also like another thing that really helped with my mental health was, which I don't know if it was actually this or if it's like a placebo effect, but like medication. Like I'm on SSRIs now,
Hmm.
and since I started taking that, like I've noticed that my so like I was saying, I have like generalized anxiety and then also social anxiety, and that's like really really helped with the generalized anxiety. And like it's basically, I mean, it's not all gone, obviously, like everyone experiences anxiety now and then, but it was like I noticed that like right before I started this medication, I had a job interview and I was nervous about it for a whole week before the interview, and then a few months into taking the medication I had another job interview and I was only nervous the day before. And so it was like it completely changed the way that my brain
Yeah.
was thinking about these like new and scary experiences. And it was like it used to be that things would just like completely overtake my brain, and now I can have a little distance between it.
Cool. That's awesome. I'm glad that's helping. And it's awesome that you're like running for office and open about talking about this stuff because it really is like so common, so normal. Like we should talk about these things and what strategies we use and medications. And so that's very cool. And also I mean, I identify with a lot of that. Not all of it, but like most of it. It's in particular, just to go back a second, I was also told I was shy as a kid.
Hmm.
And I like looking back, it's like I don't actually think I'm shy. I think there was something else going on, and maybe it was anxiety about how I presented myself or something. But like I do remember being told I was shy and like internalizing that and thinking, oh well, I guess I must be shy, and that's sort of who I am. And it was like a part of my identity for a long time. And then I don't exactly know when I shed that. Certainly at some point before this podcast where I talk about all the sex I have and stuff to thousands of strangers. I don't think you could call me shy anymore. But I don't know. That's just interesting that there's that parallel how like we fit into the boxes that other people see us in, and the same with introvert extrovert. Like every time I take one of those tests, I'm like 48% extrovert, 52% introvert. I'm like somewhere right on that margin. So maybe that's a bisexual thing.
Yeah, maybe. I think also one other thing that I meant to say was that I think the social anxiety, it also relates to my bisexuality in that my social anxiety tends to be like I'll be watching myself, like trying to see myself through another person's eyes and like figure out what are they thinking about me and how am I being perceived by them.
Hmm.
And I think part of it was like feeling like I had to portray myself as straight, and feeling like I don't like I guess also like feeling like I wasn't straight and feeling like nobody was going to just assume that I wasn't straight. And so like I think a lot of like I'm not saying this the most clearly, but like
No, I totally get what you're talking about. I mean, that makes perfect sense because it's like you have to fit that, or we at least I thought I had to fit that straight box for so long. You get used to thinking about how another person sees you constantly. I identify with that very much. You're running for something. And so let's talk about that and let's talk about some politics.
yeah.
Tell us what you're running for. It's district leader in Brooklyn. What does that mean? What is it? Why are you running for it? And what do you hope to do if you are elected?
Yeah. So district leader is this position that no one has heard about, and it's pretty unique to New York City. I think they have something similar in upstate New York, but I don't think they call them district leaders. But it's essentially a leadership position within the local Democratic Party. So the Brooklyn Democratic Party is essentially like its own governing body, separate from like the government, and so it has its own like leadership and its own general members. So the ground floor is called what is the county committee, and so that's essentially just like rank and file members who they so in order to be on county committee you have to collect like a handful of signatures and from your neighbors, and you represent like a tiny like 3 block district. And then what I'm running for district leader is like a step above that. And so I'm part of the or if I win, I will be part of the executive committee of the county committee. And I will have a say over like what the party is using its resources for and who the party boss is. Because I think it's called like the executive. I forget the exact wording, but the like the leader of the executive committee, and
Cool.
I get a vote on that, and essentially the reason that I'm running is that the party right now is not doing a very good job of engaging ordinary people, which I'm sure you can agree. And again, like I think most people don't really know about these like very specific details about party politics, but essentially the party meetings are like kind of completely dysfunctional. And so like there's this system called proxy voting,
Uh-huh.
where essentially if you're not able to attend a meeting you can sign your vote over to someone else. And what the party boss does with that is that she tries to make it as hard as to attend meetings as possible, and she tries to make sure that the people who are holding county committee seats are not going to be actively participating, are not going to show up to meetings, so that then she can just get all of their votes through proxies, because there's no limit to the amount of proxies that someone can hold. And so then you end up with meetings where the party boss has more proxy votes than there are actual people voting at the meeting.
Wow.
And so she just controls everything. And I guess taking a step back, people petition to be on county committee, and then if there are vacancies then the district leaders get to appoint people to those seats. And a lot of the times they'll just appoint people who like don't even know that they're on county committee, or like don't even know what it is. And so then they're just using their names, and then the people are like, oh yeah, I'll just give you my vote, like I don't know what this is.
Interesting.
So I'm working with this group called, they have like a few different organizations under their umbrella at this point, but the original organization is New Kings Democrats, and they have this goal of reforming the Brooklyn Democratic Party and making it a real democracy and making it inclusive, and getting people to run for county committee and to run for district leader. And so they also started this campaign called Rep Your Block, which runs people for county committee. And anyone who's listening who lives in Brooklyn should sign up. And it's not very hard. You just need to collect a few signatures from your neighbors and then attend up to 2 meetings a year. And it essentially makes sure that there are active people who are participating in our party and making sure their voices are heard, and making sure that our neighbors have someone in the party who's actually listening to them. But anyway, so that was a tangent.
Cool.
But
And we'll put all the links and stuff that are mentioned in the show notes, so check that out. Just to go back for a second, I know you've worked on other campaigns and you have some experience in politics. Can you briefly tell us about that too?
yeah,
And how and how you got involved?
yeah. I've worked on a few different campaigns as a field organizer, and then most recently last year I was working on a city council race as a field director. And so for people who don't know, field organizing is basically interacting with voters and doing direct voter contact. And so that usually on a campaign that involves knocking on doors and making calls to voters and sending texts. And also more recently, there have been different like new methods developed, such as like relational organizing, which is like reaching out to your own network of friends and family and making sure that they know about elections coming up, and making sure that they're engaged and are voting. So I've been a field organizer. I've helped to recruit volunteers and train volunteers to knock on doors and talk to voters. And then I've also been a field director for a city council race in Queens last year. where I got to also deal with the voter data and be like, what is the list of voters that we should be talking to, and like what areas do we want to be prioritizing, and sort of like making an overall field plan. And really the way that I got involved in politics originally was, well, I've always sort of been interested in politics like growing up. My dad has always been very strongly opinionated about politics, and so I just grew up hearing a lot about politics as a kid. And when I was like 8 years old, my dad took me to this protest against the Iraq War, and so there's a picture of me like as a little 8-year-old in a protest. I don't know. It's always been something that I was just like sort of casually interested in, and then I would say I really started getting more involved right around the 2016 election, just like a lot of other people. And I like it happened to be right when I was like towards the end of my time in college, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my career and with my life, and politics was sort of one option that I had in there. And then the election happened, and I was like, okay, this is what I'm doing now.
Mhm.
Like we need more people in politics.
Yes. Yes, and we need more queer and bi people in politics. So, okay, we'll get to that in a second. But so let's hear about your politics. And I have a feeling, knowing that they're fairly progressive Jewish queer politics, that you may be in good company on this podcast with many of our previous guests. But like, what are your kind of thoughts? Clearly, you're a Democrat running as a Democrat. What are your current thoughts on like the Democratic Party and like this kind of tension between uniting, we need to unite and use our collective power, versus like holding the party accountable when they are not delivering on promises? And like where do you think we kind of need to go, and how do we get there?
So I think that, well, that was like five questions at once.
That's my style. And how do we get there is, I mean, that's almost unanswerable, but you can do your best.
Yeah. So in terms of my politics, I would say that I use the terms like progressive, democratic socialist, leftist, all sort of interchangeably. I think probably I most often say progressive just because it seems like the most like big umbrella term.
Mhm.
But I also identify as a democratic socialist, and I would say that like I prioritize making sure that we have a world, and like I'm focused on local New York City politics. So our city in particular is like a livable place for everyone, so that everyone has the things that they need to survive and thrive. And so that's housing, healthcare, living wage, unions, and yeah, I feel like I'm just like
Mhm.
the your typical podcast guest in terms of my
Yeah,
political views. And then
perfect.
obviously like equality and like racial equality, gender equality, LGBT rights, of course.
Good.
Yeah, and I think that so I guess sort of to like pivot to your other questions,
Uh-huh.
I also feel like the party should be a democracy, and I think that right now it's not. Right now it's very much controlled by people who like either they're like from a family who's had power for a while, or they're wealthy, or they have just like been in office for a long time. There's a lot of incumbency within our party and not a lot of fresh voices.
Hmm.
And there's also the aspect that the party tries to cultivate this incumbency on purpose, and tries to prevent new people, like we saw with like AOC's election, how she beat someone who had been in Congress for a really long time, and he was also a district leader as well as being a Congress member.
Hmm.
And I believe he was also the party boss in Queens of the Queens Democratic Party, and so he had a lot of power within the local Democratic Party. And it was incredible that AOC managed to win, because she was going up against this huge powerful incumbent, and he had the name recognition, he had the money, he had all of the institutional support. But then she ended up winning because it's like the field organizing that I was talking about. She managed to get enough grassroots supporters and have people talking to voters and getting out the word about her election. And as far as I'm aware, that's basically how she managed to do it. And so I think that
Hmm.
that's essentially where the Democratic Party should be going, that we should be focusing on democracy and on making sure that everyone has a fair say in the party, no matter how wealthy they are, no matter how much privilege they have. And right now, like going back to like the whole mess with Democratic Party meetings that I was talking about, like with proxy voting, like that inhibits democracy. If you have one person who has 500 votes and everyone else has one vote, that's not that's not democracy. That's not
Hmm.
one person, one vote,
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I what I want to do is I want to work to make sure that more people are actively participating in the party, and that we're also using party resources to be organizing rather than just sort of relying on incumbency. I think that we should be going out and talking to voters even when there aren't elections going on. And like I think that that's also like why the Democratic Party has been just like losing voters and having a lot of voters who are just apathetic, because we just like really aren't putting in the work, and we don't have the infrastructure in place to be organizing the way that we should be organizing. Like for instance, last year there were some ballot referendum, or not referendums, ballot measures that would have enacted certain voting rights reforms, and the Democratic Party didn't put any resources into getting them passed, but the Republican Party did. And this is New York State, by the way. And the Republican Party is in the minority in New York State, but they managed to prevent them from passing because the Democrats didn't put any resources into supporting them. And then it's like the same situation with like the census, where we didn't put any resources into organizing, and then we lost a congressional seat because we didn't count like 90 people. If we had counted 90 more people, we wouldn't have lost a seat.
Yep. Yeah, it does seem like the Democratic Party is like gaining sort of popular support, but is not translating that into like actual ground game. And Republicans are so organized in terms of like those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And it's also like, I mean, hear a lot about this kind of anti-democratic stuff on a national level, but I don't always really think about it at the local level. And like what you described sounds absolutely insane and ridiculous. And like, how can that be
Yeah.
happening? And
Well, actually, there was even an article that came out recently that found that they had been putting dead people up as county committee members.
I was gonna actually read a tweet you had.
Yeah.
I just saw that. So there was an article that the headline said at least 20 people were listed as Brooklyn Democratic primary candidates without their knowledge. And then you tweeted, when I'm district leader, I won't need to put anyone up for a position without their consent because I'll actually do the work and bring in and activate new folks in the party, especially from queer and youth communities. So, can you talk a little about that, like your vision for that and why it's important and how you could do that?
Yeah. So okay. So one other thing, that this isn't necessarily a direct answer to your question, but
Sure, that's fine.
um,
The questions are kind of like loose suggestions, really.
yeah. Well, it's related to queer and the Brooklyn Democratic Party.
Okay.
The queer community. So there's a lot of gender seats in the Brooklyn Democratic Party, and in the like essentially in the election law that governs how parties exist, that say that you if you have like essentially like I'm running for the female district leader seat.
Wow. Oh,
And
wow.
so this dates back to like the suffragettes time. Like Eleanor Roosevelt was a big proponent of this, and they initially put these gendered seats in place so that women would have seats at all, because otherwise it would have just been men.
Uh huh.
But like these days it doesn't really make sense, and like you often have more women who want to run than there are seats.
Uh huh.
And so then you end up like rejecting women because you're having 50-50. And then it's also like non-binary people
Right.
don't fit into either category. And like my predecessor, who like was holding the seat and then decided not to run for reelection, they identify as non-binary, and they came out after being elected. They ran for the female seat, and I think that was like part of what helped them realize that they didn't really fit into this category of woman necessarily, and that they wanted to change the way that they identified.
Wow.
And yeah, and then the county committee seats were also used to be gendered as well, but they recently got rid of those labels. So now they're just like county committee, not gendered. But there have been some lawsuits recently that have to do with trying to get rid of the gendered seats, and there were people 2 years ago who got kicked off of the ballot because they hadn't specified a gender for their county committee seats they were running for, and so then they sued the party, and the party was like, okay, we'll work on a solution to this, and they ended up getting rid of the gendered seats, and so this cycle, for the first time, it's been like gender neutral.
Huh. Wow.
And so I think that's like one way that, like, in terms of queer people being able to participate, that's like a way that not cis people, but trans people and non-binary people have been systematically pushed out of the party politics. And another way to engage these communities that have traditionally been left behind, especially youth communities and LGBT communities, are to come up with a progressive platform, which right now the Brooklyn Democratic Party doesn't have any platform. And if we essentially like had a platform and we could say, this is what we believe in, we're fighting for housing and healthcare and student loan cancellation, I think that would give people a reason to be excited to vote and to get involved. And I think right now the party doesn't really stand for anything, and I think it discourages people and makes people feel like there isn't a difference between the parties, and it doesn't matter if they vote or participate, and that everything is just terrible either way. So we need to like actually go out and be talking to these communities, and we also need to be working towards things that will better their lives. And so like universal health care, that's a huge thing that would help the queer community, and student debt cancellation, that would help young people. And I think these are things that the party needs to get behind and needs to be really really fighting for. And right now, like, you see Nancy Pelosi supporting people like Henry Cuellar, who's a representative in Texas, who's up for re-election actually the day after this podcast episode is coming out, and he's running against a progressive woman of color, and he's basically the last anti-choice Democrat in the House who's left, and Nancy Pelosi is supporting him just because he's the incumbent. And there's this wonderful woman named Jessica Cisneros who's running against him. And if you're listening to this in that district in Texas, you should support her. Or
Yeah.
actually, I might have gotten the dates mixed up. So you might have to edit that, but I think I might be mixing it up with Pennsylvania. So
let's see. May 24th.
okay, so I was a week off.
So you guys got a week. If you're listening to this on time, you got a week to get out the vote in Texas.
Yeah, but that's I think an example of how like the party is supposedly we're supposedly the pro-choice party, and yet we're supporting people who are against abortion, and we're not really fighting for what the majority believes, which is the majority believes that there should be access to help to abortion, and that it's a right. And I think that the fact that we have this right that's in danger that the majority of this country supports, I think that also just shows how little organizing we've been doing as a party, that like we can't even get our basic majority to protect basic human rights.
Yeah.
And like I think that goes all the way back down to the grassroots of the local Democratic parties, and like making sure that local Democratic parties are working actively towards organizing and making sure that people are engaged and know what's going on. Like, I feel like growing up in New York, I always sort of just assumed like, oh, well, like everyone's a Democrat here, and I don't really like we don't really need to worry about who our elected officials are because they're all Democrats and they're all going to be good. And I think that it wasn't until maybe like 2016, 2018 that I started to see that, oh no, there are like differences between different Democrats, and that there are Democrats who are sort of just sitting on their incumbency and sitting on their big money, and not really representing the people that they're supposedly elected to represent.
Yeah. Exactly. And this abortion issue, and Jessica Cisneros is like a pretty good example of this, where it's like at this moment, right after we've heard this draft decision from the Supreme Court that they're going to strike down Roe versus Wade, and then the Democrats, like, if the message from top Democrats is send us more Democrats and then we can pass these laws, no, not if you're endorsing someone who won't support this law. So then, like, if these basic fundamental rights and things that are important to our communities are going to be ignored, then it isn't just like support Democrats blindly, or like maybe it's get involved in primary season and at earlier levels to make sure we have Democrats who actually listen to their constituents.
Yeah, and I think so. There's also a couple of other examples I can think of on the state level here in New York. For instance, there's a bill called the New York Health Act, which would essentially be like Medicare for all, but for New York State. It would provide single payer universal health care. And currently, there's a majority of New Yorkers support it, and also a majority of state senators and state assembly members are co-endorsers of the bill. And if it were brought for a vote, it would pass. But the leadership of the different houses of the state legislature is just like they're not bringing it up for a vote, and it's not moving forward, even though it's like healthcare is a basic human right, and we should be getting a vote on this bill.
Yeah.
And like there are a few different things, bills like that are in the state legislature that like the governor, the speaker of the assembly, and the Senate majority leader are not prioritizing enough, and not really seeing the urgency of these bills the way that they should be.
How do you think your queerness affects your candidacy, outlook, politics, like what you might do in office, and why is it I'm going to throw 5 questions. Why do you think it is important to elect queer people? Or do you think that's important or not?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's important. So honestly, I think that being bi is like one reason that I like said yes to running for this, is because I feel like our community is not talked about and not prioritized. And like that was a reason that I wanted to run. It was because like growing up here, even in New York City, like I didn't know about bisexuality. So like I think having more people in power, more people who have their names out there, and have a platform being vocal about their identities and about their queerness, I think that really will matter to the generations coming after us, and people who are kids now, who are maybe just like thinking about their sexualities or genders.
Yep.
And I think also in terms of like the way that I've been campaigning, I've also been very clear, and I've been vocal about the fact that I'm queer and bisexual, and I've been making sure to say that. In like, for instance, there have been some different endorsements that I've applied for with different local Democratic clubs, and I've in my speeches I made sure to mention that I was bisexual, and say how important I think it is for, especially for bi women, to get elected, because bi women have higher rates of mental illness and homelessness and sexual assault, and that we're really ignored, and we deserve to be heard more than we are. And like after one of those meetings, someone came up to me and said that they actually identify as bi, but they like don't really talk about it, and they were so grateful that I had brought it up, and that it had like made them sort of feel teary, and and I
Oh,
was just like, oh wow, like I'm already like, this is already a good thing, it's already helping people. And
yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, the visibility and buy rep alone is like worth it, but then I think it makes total sense. Like bi people are sort of at the forefront of many of these struggles with mental health, with housing, with healthcare, and so to have someone from that community, like yeah, especially having been to Buy Request, being a community organizer, like you've seen all this stuff firsthand.
yeah. I also, so this is unrelated to what we were just talking about, but I just thought
Sure.
of another thing that I wanted to talk about, which is I remember that the episode where you were talking to Sherry Eisner about being Jewish. I really liked that episode also, and I felt like there were a lot of connections between being Jewish and being bisexual, and sort of
Yeah.
having it be like this invisible thing, or this thing is sort of like in a spectrum, and like we're like white, but not completely white, but like it's
Hmm.
like, yeah, it's interesting. And like I think also like feeling like it's like something that you have to hide. And like growing up, like I remember, I think the way that I most look Jewish is like with my hair. Like I have curly hair, and I remember growing up and wanting to have like straight blonde hair
Uh-huh.
and wanting to be whiter,
Hmm.
and like wanting to conform. But then I think that like is also like you lose part of your culture, like you were talking about, when you conform more to whiteness. And I think it's also like similar with being bi, that like if you conform more to straightness, you and don't like acknowledge your identity or like talk about it, that it you lose some of your queer community.
Yeah.
um
Yeah, there's so many parallels between Judaism and queerness, and it just seems like so many people I know in the Jewish community are exploring queerness for
yeah.
some reason. Do you think and I mean, do you think your Judaism informs your politics or your candidacy too? Like, and do you see a need for more Jewish representation, or is there a lot of that in Brooklyn already? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a need for more progressive Jewish representation.
Oh,
I
interesting.
think that you see people who are like the Orthodox Jewish community has some elected officials from their community, and then I think that there are more than enough like pro-Israel elected officials. um,
Seems
but
like it.
yeah, I mean, so there's another organization that I'm part of called Jews for Racial and Economic Justice.
I am also part of it.
Ah, cool. Yeah.
J-Fridge.
Yeah. I think they're great, and they do a great job of elevating leftist Jews and supporting candidates of color who aren't necessarily Jewish, to show that our liberation is all connected, and that we can't just focus on liberation for Jews. We need to focus on liberation for everyone,
Yeah,
and that like none of us is really free until all of us are free.
indeed.
And I think also like, so growing up, I wasn't like super religious, but my family did celebrate Passover every year. And I think that like growing up with Passover and like having this part of our culture being about liberation and freedom, and like the way that my family celebrated Passover, we would always talk about like ways that the world isn't free today, and like
Mhm.
draw parallels between the Jewish people being slaves in Egypt, and people not having freedom today.
Yep.
And so like I think that also definitely influenced my politics from a young age, and also just like the way that I think like my parents raised me. Like I think that having grown up in a household where one of my parents is Jewish, I think that my family was a lot more open about like sexuality and also like difference in general, and like was more accepting. I think because of that background, at least in part.
Interesting. That's interesting and kind of makes sense to me, but it also like I've seen it both ways where like for some people their Judaism kind of makes them more open to differences, and for some people it's like they had to fit in and conform to survive, and then they pass that on, this like that the feeling that you need to do that to survive. And so, depending on the what kinds of trauma specific people have been through, like it can go both ways, but it's definitely connected either way.
Yeah.
Okay, but can we do some rapid fire logistics? When
Sure.
when is your election? What's the
Oh,
date?
so this is actually not going to be rapid fire
Okay.
response, because as there is always with like New York City politics, it's complicated.
Okay.
Um, so originally the primary was supposed to be June 28th, but there are some lawsuits that are trying to throw out the maps that were drawn, because there was the redistricting happened, and they redrew the all of the legislative and congressional maps. And so like my race depends on the state assembly maps. And right now they've decided to throw out the congressional maps and the state senate maps, which don't directly affect my election. But
Uh-huh.
there's another lawsuit that someone brought forward recently that would throw out the assembly maps as well. And so then they might end up pushing the primaries all back to August.
Okay. Okay. And my
So,
next question was going to be like, who can vote for you? What area of Brooklyn are you representing? But I guess you can't answer that yet either.
yeah. Well, the map didn't change very much
Okay.
from the way it was last year to this year, 2 years ago, I guess was the last time there was an election. But it generally the neighborhoods are like the northern and central part of Park Slope and Gowanus, Carroll Gardens, Borum Hill, Cobble Hill, downtown Brooklyn, Brooklyn Heights, and Dumbo. Oh, and also like the Navy Yard, but I don't think anyone really lives there. Um, I don't know how much that's going to change, but that's what the map looks like right now.
And how many district leaders are there for that area?
So there are two district leaders per assembly district.
Okay.
So my friend Aaron is running for the male seat, um,
Okay.
and we're running as a team, and then each of us has actually two opponents, and
Okay.
so there's one candidate who's like more tied to the party boss, and then the other opponent that I have is she's I would say she's not terrible, but I think that I'm a better candidate. Obviously, I think that, or I wouldn't be running still. But the other candidate like supports the same sort of things around reforming the party that I do, but she's not an organizer in her background, and she's a bit more established and a bit more like she's connected to the local assembly member in this district. But I'm like the most leftist candidate and the organizer candidate and the young candidate.
Cool. And the bisexual candidate.
Yeah.
And then so is whenever it happens in either June or August or whatever, is that the end, or is there a general election also?
So not for my election, and it's
Okay.
just in the primary because it's a party position. It's not
Okay.
a public office.
Cool.
And so it's like we don't have Republicans voting for Democratic Party positions.
Cool. Awesome. Well, everyone get out and vote either in late June or August, depending on the lawsuits. But whenever any primaries are in New York or everywhere, we should always vote in all of them for the reasons Lydia has described. The local primaries are often more important than the general, especially in probably a place like Brooklyn.
Yeah, especially in New York City, where it's really all the Democrats win pretty much always.
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure that you have a say in which Democrats are representing us.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add about the election or about anything we didn't get to cover that people should know?
I guess just that if you're interested in getting more involved with my campaign,
Yeah.
we're always looking for more volunteers and also donations if you have any money that you can send our way. But yeah, but if you're interested in volunteering, especially, you should sign up for updates on my website, which is lydiagreenbk.com. But you'll put that in the notes.
We'll put it in
also.
the notes too. Yep.
Yeah, and if you want to follow me on social media, I'm at Lydia Green BK pretty much everywhere.
Awesome. Cool. So follow your fellow bi activist Lydia Green on social. Go to that website, check our show notes. And yeah, hopefully we'll get some more bi and queer representation in our local government right now, and then more and more in bigger roles in government too. Hey, bonus clip. Do you want to talk about Kirsten Sinema? No, actually, I don't want to talk about Kirsten Sinema. Because
Yeah,
it's like we need bi representation, and then we get it at the highest level, and it's like pointless and sucks. And
yeah, all of our bi representation right now sucks. Like there's like Kirsten Sinema, who is terrible and conservative, and like I feel like she does not represent the average bisexual person.
No.
And then there's even like Katie Hill, who was a representative in California, and she ended up stepping down and having some like there were some revenge porn.
I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, but then there was also an accusation that she was like having a relationship with a staffer, which is like not great. So
Not
and
ideal representation.
yeah, and then in New York State, we've had one state legislator who is bisexual, and he also had a sexual harassment scandal. So not great.
Cool. So fun. Well, elect Lydia for Brooklyn, and there will be no scandals, only lots of great progressive politics and community building and healthcare and stuff like that. Right?
Yes.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for being here, Lydia. It was really nice to see you again and hear more about your story and the campaign. So everyone go check it out.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Two Bi Guys is edited and produced by me, Rob Cohen, and it was created by me and Alex Boyd. Our music is by Ross Mincer, our logo art is by Caitlin Weinman, and we are supported by the Gotham, formerly IFP. Thanks for listening to Two Bi Guys.